a huge week at OpenAI, but not always in a good way. Now, the week started innocently enough early last week. OpenAI finally rolled out advanced voice mode to all ChatGPT Plus and team users. I will say it is pretty amazing. I'm really enjoying it. At the same time, there's some big reports that were largely exciting came out that Sam Altman and other tech leaders had actually been pitching the White House on building enormous data centers, ones that are 5 gigawatts each. That is the equivalent of 5 nuclear reactors. All across the US, they're pitching this idea to build these to power the AI revolution. These would roughly cost about a cool $100 billion each. But things quickly got a little messy because right around the same time as this report, CTO Mira Murati said that she was leaving OpenAI, posted a letter revealing why that was the case, saying it was time to step back and explore different opportunities. At the same time, we also saw the chief research officer, Bob, and the VP of engineering, VP Barrett Zoff, will also leave the company at the exact same time. So we now, instead of just having Mira Murati leave, we also had multiple other people. So we have Bob McGrew, company's chief research officer, and Barrett Zoff, vice president of research, departing at the exact same moment. Now, pretty quickly, Sam Altman goes into damage control mode. He posted on X, thanking them for their work and noting, quote, Mira, Bob, and Barrett made these decisions independently of each other and amicably, but the timing of Mira's decision was such that it made sense to now do this all at once so that we can work together for a smooth handover to the next generation of leaderships. The very next day, Reuters reports that OpenAI is working on a plan to restructure into a for-profit company and give Sam Altman equity. Now, we had known something like this was in the works, but it seems to confirm that this is moving forward quickly. Now, this is then followed by a series of unflattering reports about what's going on within the company. So one of them from Karen Howe in The Atlantic presents a pattern of persuasion and consolidation of power by Altman internally at OpenAI. A second report from the Wall Street Journal said, quote, the chaos and infighting among executives at OpenAI is worthy of a soap opera. And a third from The Information wasn't directly about the executive shakeups, but it did reveal that OpenAI is now being forced to train a new version of its Sora video model, as, quote, several signs point to the video model not being ready for prime time when OpenAI first announced it earlier this year. So overall, all these departures, the scrambling by Sam Altman to address the issue, Greg Brockman also had posted about it, in the moment. And then these kind of insider reports of shakeups, delays, uncertainties together are kind of painting a bit of a chaotic picture at OpenAI. And Paul, I really liked in this week's edition of the Exec AI newsletter, which is a new weekly newsletter you're writing through Marketing AI Institute's sister company, SmarterX, you wrote, quote, I've spent 13 years monitoring and studying the AI industry. This was one of the crazier weeks I can recall. OpenAI alone had what seemed like a year's worth of news condensed into 5 days. Can you maybe take a step back for us here and tell us what the heck is going on at the company? How worried should we be about this? What's the deal?
Yeah, I mean, it really was hard to kind of follow and understand everything that was happening. And each of these things, like the data center thing, we could probably spend 20 minutes talking about what all that means and unpack that. Like each of these items on their own could probably be a main topic. But what we're going to try and do is connect the dots, why all this is happening at the same time and what it probably means. So at a very high level, this is a nonprofit research company that many of the top AI people in the world went to work at, starting back in 2015, to work on building artificial general intelligence, to be at the frontier of developing the most advanced intelligence, non-human intelligence that the world has ever seen. And that was what they were there for. And at some point, around 2022, ChatGPT emerges and OpenAI all of a sudden catches, lightning in a bottle, and they start becoming a product company. And that appears to, since that time, be creating enormous friction within the organization. There are people who still are there for the pure research side of this, to be at that frontier, to have access to the computing power to do incredible things and build incredible things. And then there's people who are business people like Sam Altman, who are trying to capitalize on a potentially once in a generation or once in a look, I don't know, once in a world lifetime opportunity to build a massive company. And so there was an article that came out. I think it actually came out like after I wrote the Exec AI newsletter on Friday.
Mm.
Um, and it said OpenAI is growing fast and burning through piles of money. And this was a New York Times article, and they had gotten access to financial documents that I believe are being shared with potential investors. So as we've talked about, and you alluded to, Mike, they're raising money. Word is they're actually going to finalize the decision this week of who is going to be allowed to invest. So they're
Mm.
kind of they have more investors lined up than they're going to take. So a couple of key insights here, and I think this is really relevant. So in the New York Times article, they said monthly revenue for OpenAI hit 300 million in August, up 1,700% since the beginning of 2023. Now that's kind of like it's one of those things where you can make data say whatever you want it to say. So beginning of 2023, ChatGPT was 2 months old. So the 1,700% is kind of like a useless number. I'm not sure why they do that. But the company, this number is significant. The company expects about 3.7 billion in annual sales this year. So that's a big number.
Mm.
OpenAI estimates that its revenue will balloon to 11.6 billion next year. So this is actually very relevant. We've heard the rumor that OpenAI was being valued at around 150 billion in this investing round, which like a couple months ago when they were doing some internal stuff, it was like 86 billion was the number being thrown around. So 150 billion sounds like a lot, but if they're projecting like a forward revenue, 1 year forward revenue, 11.6 billion, then that's actually a pretty reasonable multiple range. And I'll explain the multiple range a little bit more when we talk about Anthropic's valuation in one of the rapid fire items. But a roughly like 10 to 13 times forward-looking revenue is not unheard of in the technology world. So that $150 billion valuation now starts to make a little sense. But then the New York Times also said they expect to lose 5 billion this year. So even though they're doing 3.7 billion in annual sales this year, they're going to lose 5. ChatGPT on its own is bringing in 2.7 billion this year. So that's 2.7 out of 3.7. So, the vast majority of their revenue is coming from ChatGPT. They did 700 million last year for comparison. And then the other billion is coming from other businesses using its technology, I assume through the API. So roughly 10 million ChatGPT users pay the company a $20 monthly fee. The New York Times had that they're planning on raising that by $2, I assume per month by end of the year, and then aggressively raising it to $44 in the next 5 years, which to me seems like absurd that they even could forecast that, because like what happens when there are different versions of the model and more intelligent, and maybe it's 2,000 per month. So I wouldn't put
Mm.
a ton of stock in that. And then the big kind of grand finale from the New York Times is OpenAI predicts its revenue will hit 100 billion in 2029. So this kind of like is the first time that I know of that we're seeing these sort of numbers, like true inside look at what's going on. But it does confirm what I've said on the podcast recently, which is the 6 to 7 billion they're raising isn't enough money. Like this is just a prelude to everything else. And I don't remember if it was this article or another one I read over the weekend that was talking about the complexity they're going to deal with. So to raise this money, they have to convert the company into a for-profit. But to convert into the for-profit, they can't just like wipe away what existed in the nonprofit. Like the nonprofit has to get assets and value out of this thing, and it's going to be really complicated. So apparently what they're doing is raising this money, and then they have 2 years to complete the process of converting over from the nonprofit. So this is going to be really, really messy and weird and almost like unparalleled. It's not like
Mm.
we've never had a nonprofit become a for-profit, but probably not of this size. And so, but again, like they're losing 5 billion this year. Raising 6 to 7 isn't going to solve anything. And so I still feel like everything happening right now is just a prelude to an IPO, like as quickly as they can probably get to an IPO. And so, again, it's just keep in context why this is all happening. Like all this drama is likely coming from the fact that we had this research firm that's trying to become this massive $1 trillion company within a couple years. Because at 100 billion in 2029, in revenue, I mean, you're talking about a $1 to $2 trillion market cap publicly traded company at that point. So, one of the 15 biggest companies in the world basically is what they're projecting in 5 years. So this leads to another really good article from the Wall Street Journal where it was turning OpenAI into a real business, is tearing it apart. And this one was fascinating. I think this one came out either Friday night or Saturday morning, if I remember correctly. So I'm just going to go through a few key excerpts from here because this is stuff we've never heard before. Like
Mm.
there's some insights in here that, to my knowledge, we had not seen. So the first is, it says some tensions are related to conflicts between OpenAI's original mission to develop AI for public good and then deploying money-making products. But this gets into Mira leaving and some of the other people leaving. So Mira is now one of 20 OpenAI researchers and executives who have quit this year, including multiple co-founders, John Schulman, who we talked about recently on an episode, Andrej Karpathy, Ilya Sutskever, like all of them were like, they were co-founders. They've been there from the beginning
Mm.
and they've all quit. That's a trend. That is not like an anomaly. That is like something is going on. The article said that Altman has been largely detached from day to day characterization that the company disputes, but you can see it. Like he's everywhere globally, trying to raise tons of money. He's doing lots of interviews. He's all over the place, but he's not involved in the technical side of the business and the day to day operations. Meanwhile, he's the CEO of a company that went from 770 employees last November when he was fired as CEO for 5 days and then brought back. They're now at 1,700 employees. So lots of growth. So you could just look at this and say this is just standard growth stuff and it's complicated. But that doesn't actually seem to be the case. So it got into Ilya, and when he left the company, so it said that Mira and President Greg Brockman actually went to Sutskever's house and tried to convince him to come back when he left because the company was in disarray and to, quote, might collapse without him, because they saw all the top researchers were going to leave if Ilya was out.
Mm.
And so apparently, and this is again the first time I'm seeing this anywhere, he was ready to come back. Like Ilya was kind of thinking, okay, maybe I'll come back, maybe we'll work this out. And then he got a call from Greg Brockman who said, we're rescinding the offer. Like, you're not welcome back, basically. And apparently what the article said is that they couldn't figure out his new role. Like they'd already replaced him and they couldn't make that guy like step back down really. So they couldn't come to an agreement on what his role was going to be. So he left. Then the other one that I thought was really intriguing is, when Greg Brockman took his sabbatical the day after 4.0 came out, if I remember correctly.
Mhm.
So it's weird. Like we had Advanced Voice comes out, Mira leaves, and these other two executives. A few months earlier, 4.0 comes out, Greg Brockman leaves the next day on sabbatical. And what I said at the time, and I've said multiple times since, is it's a very oddly timed sabbatical, like with very little information. Well, ends up that apparently Sam and Greg agreed, quote unquote, mutually that Greg should maybe step aside for a little bit. So what this article is saying is that people haven't always loved Greg's management style. It says, quote, his management style caused tension. Though President Brockman didn't have any direct reports, he tended to get involved in any projects he wanted, often frustrating those involved. According to current and former employees, they said he demanded last-minute changes to long-planned initiatives, prompting other executives, including Mira Murati, to intervene to smooth things over. For years, staffers urged Altman to rein in Brockman, saying his actions demoralized employees. Those concerns persisted through this year when Altman and Brockman agreed he should take a leave of absence. So that was interesting, and that kind of jives with why all of a sudden the sabbatical. And then the final thing I'll end with here is this idea again of Sam pushing growth because that's what Sam does,
Mm.
versus the research team and the technical team led by Mira that often was pushing back saying, we're not ready to do these things. And if you recall, like ChatGPT was this, like Sam's the one that green lighted ChatGPT and said, basically, you have like 3 weeks to launch this product.
Yeah.
And maybe the technical team, Ilya, Mira, maybe they didn't agree even back then. And so they gave a couple of examples. So it said that Mira repeatedly delayed the planned launches of products, including Search, which we still don't have, Search GPT, which was announced months ago, Voice, which we finally just got, but Mira's the one that took the PR hits over Voice. And then Sora, which is the one you mentioned, which is video, which again, Mira was the one getting interviewed saying, well, what's the training data? And her having to lie to people, basically saying, I don't know what the training data is. Like, of course you know what the training data is, Mira, come on. So they said that the information had it, that it's just not ready, that what we saw the demos of was misleading, probably at best, that it takes, the one source said 10 minutes to create like a few seconds of video, like what we were seeing demos of, and that it can't create consistent characters and objects and all these things. So what I wrote on LinkedIn, and I'll just kind of read this and then, see if we have any other thoughts here, Mike. So the Wall Street Journal article that we'll link to, the one thing that jumped out to me is it said in this spring, tensions flared up internally over the development of a new AI model called GPT-4o, which is the one where Greg left the next day, that would power ChatGPT and business products. Researchers were asked to do more comprehensive safety testing than initially planned, but given only 9 days to do it. Executives wanted to debut 4o ahead of Google's annual developer conference and take attention away from their big rival, which is funny because we always joke about that. Like, just look and see the calendar of events and you know when the next products are going to come because they're just going to launch them the day before Google does their stuff. It went on to say the safety staffers worked 20-hour days and didn't have time to double check their work. The initial results, based on incomplete data, indicated GPT-4o was safe enough to deploy. But after the model launched, people familiar with the project said a subsequent analysis found the model exceeded OpenAI's internal standards of persuasion. Now that's interesting because that's what I've said multiple times recently on the podcast is these things are far more capable of persuasion than they're letting on. And they're actually extracting that capability by trying to find when it's doing it and stop it from doing it. But natively, these models are insanely persuasive. And they probably have been since GPT-4o was first created. So then I said, this is a microcosm of the AI industry now. Companies are racing to preview and launch more advanced models and products before their competitors in order to win market share, investment dollars, stock price increases, and ego boosts. This leads to half-baked hardware like Rabbit and Humane AI Pin, product demos we won't see in production for months or years, like Meta Orion, which we'll talk about in a minute, Apple Intelligence, which they launched phones that don't actually have Apple Intelligence, and yet they're running ads featuring Apple Intelligence, which makes no sense, OpenAI Sora and advanced voice, and Google's Project Astra. And then the models may be more capable and dangerous than what we're being led to believe. In fact, I know that they're more capable than what we're being led to believe. And yet, the balance side of this is the tech is still very real. Its impact on businesses, the economy, society is still completely underestimated and underappreciated. And then I said, for the first time in human history, we have intelligence on demand. It's going to be messy. We're going to have instances like this where the companies at the frontier have really bad days and weeks and take a ton of PR hits and lose really talented people because this is unparalleled. Like what we're doing here is like nothing we've ever seen. And so these companies that are actually out there leading and the leaders who are pushing us into this frontier of the intelligence age, it's not going to be a straight line. And so that's kind of where it leaves us. And then the one final thought I'll leave us, Mike, is Google has to just be salivating right now. Like if, like we've said this before, like I would never bet against Google in the end here. And all these things that Sam is now trying to solve for, he's got talent leaving left and right. He's got to raise money just to like solve for the fact they're losing $5 billion. He's trying to convince people to build the data centers. Like who's got all of that already? Google has it all. Google has the ability to pay $2.5 billion to bring back Noam Shazer from Character.ai, who was one of the authors of the Attention is All You Need paper. They have data centers. They have infrastructure. They have everything. They're the ones that created all the innovations that drove everything. And so I mean, if I'm Google, I am just sitting back and I am like watching all this turmoil and
Mm.
I am looking for the opportunity to re-seize the leadership position that you had for 2 decades. And I couldn't help myself like all weekend thinking about that they have to be ready to pounce. Like
Yeah.
right now is when you go. Like
Mm.
all like the Sora model's not ready. You've got Project Astra sitting there. You've got Notebook LM, which obviously alludes to way more advanced voice capabilities than the public knew they had. There's so much stuff that I would just be like, I don't think Anthropic can do it. They're trying to raise their own money. They got all these problems. They don't have their own chips. They don't have it, they don't have distribution. They don't have anything.
Yep.
This is Google's game to win again all of a sudden. And
Mm.
I find that fascinating.
Especially the whole on-device AI thing as they're baking Gemini into, all of your different apps, all of your different phones,
Yeah.
especially where we talked about Apple kind of whiffing a little bit at the moment. It's really, really an interesting time.
Yeah, and to that point, like, there's rumors now that, like, part of the reason Apple Intelligence isn't out on time is because Apple's pulling back from their OpenAI relationship. That they're not taking the board seat. They
Mm.
may not invest in the next round,
Mm.
and maybe they're seeing these conflicts as well and saying, "Well, maybe that's not the horse to bet on." And now, I'm not saying that they won't still integrate ChatGPT capabilities into Apple Intelligence. My guess is they will.
Yeah.
But I would assume they are now far more aggressively building their own capabilities. So 6 to 12 months from now, they don't need ChatGPT, and there it's going to be Apple models doing everything. Or in a crazy turn of events, maybe it's Google's models, maybe it is Gemini,
Mm.
maybe it's somebody else. They've done plenty of big deals before, so I don't know. Like I mean, OpenAI is going to raise their money. They're going to announce sometime this week or next week, probably, that they raised 7 billion or 10 billion or whatever that number is, and they're going to have all kinds of amazing investors. But it is not a sure thing right now. That's all I'm saying. Is like there is a lot of instability, and this is the stuff that's surfaced to like New York Times and Wall Street Journal. Imagine what's
Right.
happening that hasn't surfaced yet.
Yeah. Uh,
And then I did one other quick note. I saw an Anthropic employee, a former Anthropic employee, because Anthropic, there was some people sort of like taking a victory lap here that
yeah.
OpenAI was getting, a bad week. And that person was like, listen, my NDA is up. You better watch yourselves because everything that's going on at OpenAI is happening at Anthropic too. So you
Mm.
know, don't be pretending like you've got this all figured out. So yeah, it's hard. Like companies building at this pace and these kind of valuations, like there isn't much precedent for how to do this right,
Mm.
and so it's going to be messy. And maybe we have some unexpected um, left turns, I guess, for some of these companies that seem like the winners right now.